Welcome to All Grown Up Now, Tales of a Checkered Past. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is an evolution of the tale, All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts. This is Season 2, and it's called Tales of a Checkered Past. It's a collection of short stories from my salad days on up to the present. In each podcast, another self-contained story will be presented. These podcasts will be broadcast bi-weekly, so you get 2 a month. Enjoy. Episode 50 is called Love Letter to Darrell. This episode is about a special man from my Oklahoma days. His name was Darrell. He became the gold standard as far as men were concerned. And as an aside, a fun fact for my listeners. These guys come around once every 30 years. Keep that in mind. Operating without a net. That's how I felt when I got the call with the news. He had died of a heart attack. Up until then, it was a comfort to know that there was one man on the planet who worshiped the ground I walked upon. But then he was gone. If ever there was an odd couple, it was Darrell and me. Our blind date was set up in the fall of 1980 by Barry, an evil queen who managed the children's department at Dillard's at Quail Springs. Darrell was someone Barry had dated, as the story went, and Barry told me that Darrell was nice and I might like him. Later, when Darrell and I hit it off, Barry had a real jealous hissy fit. It seems that he had feelings for Darrell even then. That's when I found out that the blind date was done as a joke on both of us. It was not expected to work out. You see, Darrell was the country mouse, and I was the city mouse. Our first date was to go to a meeting of an organization that I think was called Oklahomans for Human Rights. It was the gay rights group. Or more to the point, the gay men's group. I don't remember seeing women at the meeting I attended. We had agreed that he would pick me up at my apartment at 6:30, and the meeting started at 7. I was in the shower about 5:45 when I heard a knock at the door. Damn it, this is not a good time for Mrs. Freeman to come visit, I thought. My landlady was always dropping by unannounced, but I didn't have a telephone. So, wrapping myself in a towel with shampoo still in my hair so she got the idea that she had interrupted something, I answered the door dripping wet, and it was so cold. Darrell was standing there. I got here early because I didn't know the area and wanted to find the place. And his voice trailed off. I noted appreciably that he was nice-looking, like a budget version of Tom Selleck, shorter and a bit softer, but still quite appealing, with really kind, blue Labrador Retriever eyes. But I was too preoccupied with my present appearance to just invite him in and have a go at him right there. Well, obviously I'm not ready, so could you come back at 6:30? I asked. Sure, he said, and off he sauntered. We arrived at the meeting hall, took places in the front row, and waited for the meeting to start. They did the usual meeting starting stuff. But then, much to everyone's surprise, one of the board members got up, and, face reddening and veins in his neck popping, started a diatribe about how the others in the group were just using this to meet up with other A-gays as a social club and weren't really interested in the struggle for human rights, and they were all disgusting and he was leaving. Verbal fisticuffs broke out, and the end result was that the organization self-destructed that evening. Darrell and I just looked at each other and blinked a lot. Then we got up and left. I remember vaguely that we went out to dinner, but our first date had really been a bust. Barry had a good laugh the next day at work when I told him about it, and I put Darrell out of my mind. About a week later, I got a call at work, and at first I didn't recognize the voice. It was Darrell, and he wanted to try again to see if he could have another date. He apologized about the outcome of the previous one in such a way that it sounded like he felt personally responsible for the bad behavior that ruined my good time. I was charmed. Who knows where we went on that date? I really can't remember. I just remembered afterwards when I invited him home and how sweet he was. We talked late into the night. Darrell told me that he was born in Elk City, Oklahoma, a small-town boy with small-town, but not small-minded values. He went to Vietnam, but happily didn't return a shattered man. The government trained him in bookkeeping, so he was able to get a job in Oklahoma City as an office manager in a mortuary. Now, as an aside, he never insisted that I go into the back rooms, nor needed to himself, nor did he ever ask me to take a cold bath and lie very still. That came with a later, very short-time paramour who also worked in the industry. But again, that's another story. Darrell's family was salt of the earth, just like him, and accepted as being gay with equanimity. I met them later on and liked them very much. This man, Darrell, was a solid citizen, real husband material. He was enough older that he was stable and experienced, but not so old as to be stodgy or of another generation. And he was kind and he was decent. These are qualities I didn't quite fully appreciate as much then as I do now. We started dating regularly, and at one point I realized that he was getting serious. Now, this made me nervous. I was 23, I was young with all the stupidity that comes with it, and I was fickle and having adventures and planning my escape from Oklahoma. Marrying him would just complicate things. I talked to Barry about this, and that's when he told me that the date had been a joke for his own personal entertainment. Darrell and I were supposed to hate each other. The city sophisticate fashion queen would only be bored with the slow-talking country hick, who would find the city sophisticate fashion queen tedious and shallow. Barry would revel in the comedic possibilities like a sitcom only live. He didn't think that Darrell and I would actually start dating regularly, let alone get to a point where one of us might get serious. It really annoyed him. But I knew I had to say something to Darrell about how I was feeling. At the same time, I didn't want to hurt him. In the interest of fair play, I wanted to be as honest as I could. He was a really sweet man, the nicest I had come across at that point, and more than merited fair treatment. Since I was still regarded as new meat in town, everyone wanted to have a ride, and I heard lots of the "I'll call you, you're special, grow old with me" bullshit. But when Darrell said it, there was a difference. It wasn't bullshit. When he looked at me, I could see steady adoration in his eyes. This confused and disoriented me. I hadn't dated anyone like him before. I was out of my depth. So, One evening, we went out to dinner at a restaurant called Aunt Pittypat's, which was in an old house in the historic district, such as it was in Oklahoma City. We were seated at a banquette where the tables were about 3 inches apart. I knew this was going to make conversation a challenge, as everyone was sitting practically in each other's laps. But I knew we had to talk. However, I waited until dessert because I was hungry and he was treating. Darrell, we have to talk, I began. Okay, so no points for originality. I feel like you're ready to pick out the china pattern, and I'm not there yet. I'm quite fond of you, but I can't say I'm in love with you. There was a crash at the next table. The couple there was so intent on eavesdropping that they knocked a big pitcher of beer over, which created a Niagara Falls of sorts that completely soaked the carpet and my favorite pair of bally shoes with beer. "Hon, that's all right," he said in his sweet Okie accent as I was drying off my shoes. "I realize that you don't feel as strong for me as I do for you. You don't have to. Just know that I love you." I apologize to Darrell for the way I'm speaking his dialogue, as it sounds like the dialogue from an extra in the film Deliverance. Darrell wasn't a rube, an idiot, or a product of incest. He was just a really good, sweet, decent guy. Later, we ended up back at his place, taking a bubble bath and making love in his very, very deep, antique, claw-footed tub, candles burning all around the room. With Darrell, I learned the difference between having sex and making love. This particular evening ranks up there as one of the more romantic evenings in my memory, even to this day. The next day, the florist arrived at my humble apartment with a bouquet of orchids. Barry started acting really squirrely after my conversation about how serious Darrell was getting. Barry was frequenting the bars and the bathhouse. There was only one in Oklahoma City, what a surprise. I went there only once. It was built during the Woodrow Wilson administration and cleaned only sporadically since. Barry had the idea that he would find a husband at the bathhouse. I used to tell him that the type of man who hangs out at those places regularly probably wouldn't be husband material, but he just dismissed me as one truly inexperienced queen. Inexperienced, perhaps, but I did have some common sense and a lot of field research to base this on. Guys looking for husbands generally hang out in different venues than guys just looking for some fun. Also, when we spoke of Darrell, there was an edge to Barry's voice, especially the time I told him about Darrell taking me to the Eagle's Nest. The Eagle's Nest was a very fancy restaurant in a cylindrical building called the Chartel Tower. The Eagle's Nest rotated at the top. It was very fancy, but throughout the evening, if you set your drink on the windowsill, you'd lose your drink. Now, I, of course, left out the part about getting a serious case of food poisoning from that dinner. I didn't tell Darrell about it at first either. He found out only by accident. He called at work, and they told him I was homesick with it. Darrell was so upset and felt personally responsible, like he had indeed put the botulism there himself. I had to remind him that buying me dinner didn't automatically mean that he poisoned me. "He never took me there before," Barry spat after hearing the news with his hand on his hip like Betty Davis. "Why would he take you there?" "Perhaps it might be because I'm nice to him, bitch," I said. One day in the early spring, Barry didn't show up to work. Since he didn't call in sick, everyone at work asked me where he was. Straight people are funny. They think all of us gay boys know each other and keep each other apprised of our social calendars and whereabouts. It's sort of like air traffic control for fairies. I phoned Barry's apartment a couple of times with no answer, so I went by his place after work. Repeated knocking on the door got me no answer, even though his car was in the driveway. So I decided I'd go home and stay put. Perhaps I might hear something. A couple of hours later, Brad the doll called me from work. "Get over to Barry's house," he shouted. "He's taking pills." "How do you know?" I asked. "I just talked to him on the phone. Get over there. I'll meet you." Well, off in the car I went, breaking the land speed record and beating the odds of getting all green lights all the way there. I broke into Barry's apartment and pulled him out of bed. He was indeed a mess, a real mess. Trying not to panic, I thought to myself, okay, what do they do in the movies? I remember that in the movies, if someone tried suicide, they got the person on his feet and walked him around and made coffee. So I put on some coffee and hauled Barry out of his bed and started walking him around. Now, I'm sure this was a sight because he was easily a head and a half taller than I was. Barry wanted me to put on some music. "Music?" I said. "Yeah, Donna Summer," he slurred. So I slung him across my back and tried to get his cheap-ass stereo working. He got exasperated and said, "You're so stupid, you never were worth anything." I was sorely tempted to drop him right there and leave, locking the door behind me. Instead, I called Don, my sister's husband, on the phone. He had a cool head and worked in the lab at Baptist Hospital. Quickly, I outlined the situation and read the information on the empty bottle beside the bed. "You need to get him in and get his stomach pumped in soon," he said. "That's not one to mess around with. It's not like in the movies where you can walk him around and pour coffee down his throat." Okay, I said. "I'll call ahead and tell him you're coming," Don said, "but get there now." Right about this time, Brad the doll arrived, and we poured Barry into my car. Brad the doll followed us over to Baptist Hospital in his beat-up yellow Pinto. The two of us dragged Barry into the emergency room, where the doctor and a couple of nurses were already waiting. Later, when they had done their work, I was sitting in the room with Barry, waiting for them to admit him overnight. Then, in walked the policeman. He didn't look like a friendly one either. I could see in his eyes that he hated fags and was disappointed that one more fag hadn't died that evening. I felt my chest tighten and the hair on the back of my neck go on end. Brad the doll was nowhere to be seen, so I'd have to deal with this one alone. He fixed me with a steely gaze and spat, "So you're his friend?" "I'm his friend with a small f, if that's what you mean." "So, he tried to off himself?" "No, officer. I'm sure it was all a mistake. He wouldn't do that." "Because if he did, you know he could go to jail." "He didn't try. It was all a big mistake." Barry came to, sort of, and wasn't aware of the policeman. In a fuzzy voice, he said, "I think it would be grand to commit suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge." I elbowed him in the ribs. "So, the fag thinks it would be grand to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, huh?" the officer said. "I didn't hear anything like that, officer. You have quite an imagination." I rang for the nurse and asked her to show the policeman out. He gave one last snort of contempt before he left. "Barry, you stupid son of a bitch," I whispered. "What the fuck were you trying to do? Get yourself thrown in jail?" I was trying to breathe deeply and get the adrenaline back under control when I looked up. It was Darrell. Boy, he was a welcome sight. The next day, I visited Barry in the hospital after telling everyone at work that he had had a bout of food poisoning. He was sitting in his bed in high dudgeon. "I've had it with this town," he shouted. "I can't even commit suicide successfully here." "You stupid bastard," I shouted back. "Thanks so much for piping up about jumping off the bridge right in front of the policeman. Just what were you trying to prove anyway? Did you want to go to jail and be some felon's butt boy?" "Oh, go fuck yourself," he shouted back. "I'm moving to Austin to be with Mark and Vic. I'll be happy there." "Well, fuck you," I shouted back. "I should have left you there to choke on your own vomit." I can't believe I said that, but I was really pissed off. I could have spent a nice evening at Christopher's with civilized people, but no, I was hauling around a 6'2" drugged-up beanpole who smelled of vomit around his apartment. Later, I met up with Darrell. He, too, had gotten a dressing down from Her Royal Highness. "Well, you gotta just let him be," he drawled. "Barry's one selfish boy. That's why it didn't work out between us. When things didn't go his way, he'd have a tantrum. I got tired of that. This is his pattern. He gets into a certain point, then does something stupid, then moves to another place. It'll happen again, I'm telling you." I don't know much else about Barry, as I never saw him again. He moved to Austin, Texas to be with Mark and Vic, but he quickly wore out his welcome there. But again, that's another story. A few months later, Darrell had to move. He was the office manager of the mortuary, and as part of his salary, he had an apartment in the back of the property. Part of the reason for this is that sometimes he would have to arrange for a body to be brought to the mortuary after hours, so the owners felt it easier to have someone on premises. Also, the neighborhood had steadily declined, and it was felt that someone on the property at night would offer more protection. The mortuary was closing, partly due to the location being so bad, so Darrell had to move. He was in a state about this. Losing a job as well as a living situation was quite a lot to take. Happily, though, my next-door neighbor Brad the doll was moving out, so I prevailed upon Mrs. Freeman to again ignore the waiting list, much to the manager's chagrin, and rent it to Darrell. My argument for this was that he was a really nice guy, and it would be such a comfort knowing my neighbor, as we lived so close. Mrs. Freeman made the call over to the office, and the deal was done. I helped Darrell move out of his little apartment and to clear out his desk in the office at the mortuary. As he was finishing up, I was snooping in the office closet and found these really pretty bronze canisters. "These would make really nice canisters for my kitchen," I said. "Would anyone miss a couple of these?" I had forgotten for a moment where I was. "No, darling, you can have as many as you want, but they're sort of occupied right now," Darrell drawled, a twinkle in his eyes. "You'll have to evict the tenants. That's what's called the unclaimed relatives closet." By moving in next door, Darrell was close enough that we could see each other easily, but I could go home and close the door if I wasn't receiving. This was the ideal situation. After he moved, I helped him fix the place up by making draperies and slipcovers. His family brought up new carpet to install, and I got to know them much better while helping move all the furniture. They seemed to approve of me and like me. This said, I was still ambivalent about Darrell and me. Now remember, I was 23 and fickle and wary about tying myself down. I had gotten burned by my first boyfriend, Brock, and I intended to get out of Oklahoma City at the first opportunity. Darrell was the model of understanding and patience, though. Looking back, I wish I had appreciated him more. Little did I know that men who worship the ground one walks upon are few and very far between. Mark and Vic had moved from Austin to San Francisco, so I planned a visit in July of 1981. As I said, they had moved. They moved there suddenly, of course, which was a pattern of theirs, and Mark had sent me a change of address card. I called him, and we arranged for the visit. This was something I had never done before, deciding to take a trip, not with a group, to a big city. Yes, Mark and Vic would be there, but it was a big thing for me to do. Darrell brought over a copy of the San Francisco Chronicle that he bought at the big newsstand downtown. "I thought you'd like to see what's happening there before you go," he drawled. "The best way is to read the newspaper, so I got you one." He was considerate like that. We both looked through the paper before we went to dinner, and we read with astonishment an installment of Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin. What so amazed us was the topic. Michael picks up a policeman at the Twin Peaks bar and talks about how guys with no taste in decorating are usually the best lays.
What?
Well, our jaws were on the ground, we were so astonished. Talking about such things in a major newspaper. Such a place San Francisco was. The days passed, but soon I went to San Francisco. Beforehand, Mark told me to bring my portfolio so I could apply for a job as his assistant, which I eventually got. Telling Darrell this was really hard. We had to decide, what are we going to do? "Hon, you gotta do what you gotta do," Darrell said. "Me, I like to visit San Francisco, but when I look out over the lights there at night, it makes me feel real lonely-like, and I want to cry. I'm a country boy, and I really love it here. I'd be miserable there. You understand that you have to go, 'cause if you stayed, you'd grow to hate me." And he was right. We slept at his place that night. The next morning, Darrell remarked that I was tense and jumpy the entire night, and then put his big arms around me and held me close. The days preceding my move to San Francisco passed in a blur. I had 10 days between when I accepted and when I had to be there. There was lots to be done: packing up my clothes, moving my furniture over to Kathy's because she had just moved out of Mom's house and needed furniture, and I needed a place to store it, closing up my apartment, and the inevitable round of goodbye dinners. Darrell was game for all of it and a tremendous help. I reserved the last free evening for him. We had dinner out and went to all the bars. In the Circa, which was a sort of piano bar on 39th Street, we ran into Brock, my first boyfriend of all people. "I hear you're moving!" Brock shouted. "Yes, I am," I replied, and introduced him to Darrell. Darrell had heard about Brock and giving me the hepatitis. He got a look on his face that resembled a Rottweiler baring his teeth. "Well, I thought something was going on," Brock said airily. "The people at Dillard's called me and asked me if I wanted to have my old job in display back, but I turned them down." Yeah, sure, I thought. "Hey, don't knock it," I replied. "It's been good for me. Here I am, going from working in display at Dillard's to San Francisco to take a position as the assistant director of visual merchandising for a chain of specialty stores, while you, dear, are still a maitre d' in a second-rate restaurant." At that, I turned and said, "Come, Darrell," turned on my heel, and swished out of the place. There was a look of astonishment on Darrell's face as he followed me out. He had never seen that side of me before. Sitting with me in the car, he said, "Do you do that often? And what's an assistant director of, First, no, I don't do that often, only when it's necessary. Second, it's a nice title for a glorified pin pusher. That's the side of me I hoped you'd never have to see." "Well, darling," Darrell drawled, "he had it coming. Now, let's go home." The last time I saw Darrell was the following Christmas. I flew back to Oklahoma City for the holidays and to pick up my fur coat, which Kathy was saving. The moving company was driving my stuff west because Kathy had just moved back in with Mom, and I didn't want the fur coat to go on the van. Besides, it's not too cold in San Francisco, so in Oklahoma City, I could wear it one more time in truly cold weather. The evening I got there, Darrell and I had a date. He was still living in the little place behind Mrs. Freeman's, so I agreed to come pick him up in Mom's Thunderbird, wearing my fur coat. It was snowing lightly when I knocked on the door. I had the fur collar turned up against the cold. The knob turned, and the door opened. There was Darrell. looking at me through the screen door with those kind, gentle eyes, grinning. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." Then in one smooth motion, he swung open the screen door, scooped me up in his arms, and gave me one of those long, deep, passionate, sweep-me-off-my-feet Hollywood screen kisses. In the movies, the orchestra music would swell in the background during the scene, and the camera would pan up to the full moon. "I've missed you," he said, setting me back down on my feet. "You look good. So San Francisco." This is music to my ears. "May I come in?" I asked. At this point, the camera would cut to waves crashing against a beach. Over the years, Darrell and I kept touch by phone and letter because we didn't see each other on holiday visits. He had moved back to Elk City, and he'd found a husband, a nice guy named Leo. I was very happy for him. Of course, I never shared this information with my ex-trophy husband. I just let him believe that Darrell was pining away for me and would do his level best to woo me back to Oklahoma City whenever he saw me. When I would come back from the visits, I would get quizzed on who I had seen. The enigmatic smiles would keep my trophy husband on his toes. Darrell never knew this, but he took care of me by remote control. When my business was not yet a year old, the stock market crashed in the fall of 1987. I had no cash reserves, but needed to fill an order which required a purchase of bulk sterling silver to make my signature cast sterling buttons. At the time, though, I didn't have a cent to spend, but knew that once I had the silver, I could turn around the order and get paid. My solution was to go to my jewelry box. Darrell had been very good to me. As I sat there, picking stones out of the many pieces he gave me, I silently thanked him and hoped he wouldn't find out, or, if he did, would understand why I did it. My trophy husband, among other things, was history by the time Darrell died. Life had changed me in some major ways. When I got the news of Darrell's death, I had a good cry. Perhaps it was a selfish cry, the tears of one who wanted to have his cake and eat it too. Life is choices, and by definition, choosing something means leaving something else behind. That doesn't mean, though, that you shouldn't feel regret for what you've left behind. The one man who had loved me without requiring anything in return was gone. Just knowing he was out there somewhere gave me comfort and a sense of security. Now that he was gone, the world felt a little more cold and lonely, a little less carefree. Looking at it from a different viewpoint, though, Darrell gave me quite a gift. I know how it feels to have that kind of love, having experienced it. Knowing how it feels, I was better able to recognize it when it came around again. And it did, 30 years later. And I'm older and wiser and more able to appreciate it. Thanks for listening. You can get the audiobook All Grown Up Now on iTunes, Audible, and Amazon, or from my website, allgrownupnow.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have any questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.